You think the most dangerous part of flying is during turbulence, high above the clouds, storms, turbulence, engine problems at 30,000 feet. But an aircraft is often far more vulnerable on the ground than it is in the air. Right now, while you are still boarding. Thousands of liters of highly flammable fuel are flowing through the wings beneath your seat, and almost nobody inside the cabin is paying attention to this. The cabin smells of coffee and jet fuel drifting in through the open aircraft door. Passengers move slowly down the aisle, distracted by phones, backpacks, and half-folded boarding passes. Overhead, bins slam shut above the seats, one after another. Near the galley, a flight attendant scans the cabin carefully. A backpack partially blocking the aisle, a passenger wearing headphones during the safety briefing, someone struggling to force oversized luggage into an overhead compartment. Normally, these are small problems, but during refueling, small problems can become evacuation hazards very quickly. If something ignites beneath the wing, the cabin may need to be evacuated immediately, while fuel lines and ground equipment are still connected to the aircraft. And in that moment, every second matters. A flight attendant suddenly steps forward and pulls a bag completely out of the aisle. "Bag fully under the seat, please." Her voice stays calm, but immediate. Outside the aircraft, the fuel hose finally disconnects beneath the wing. Ground crews step back as the last baggage containers disappear into the cargo hold. Inside the cabin, passengers barely notice the transition, but the aircraft is no longer just boarding. It is preparing to move. Then the cabin door closes. The outside noise disappears instantly, and suddenly, the aircraft feels different. Sealed, fueled, committed. And from this moment on, even the smallest mistake during fueling can change everything. A low vibration moves through the cabin floor as the aircraft begins pushing away from the gate. Outside, ground crews guide the aircraft beneath flashing ramp lights. One final signal, then the tug disconnects. Slowly, the aircraft begins moving backward into the crowded flow of airport traffic. Inside the cabin, no one notices, but outside, dozens of aircraft are already moving through the rain, only meters apart from each other. The first engine starts. A deep mechanical vibration rolls through the cabin. From this point forward, the aircraft is moving under its own power. Then the second engine comes alive. The aircraft begins taxiing, slow, controlled, routine. But some of aviation's closest calls happen right here, before takeoff even begins. Aircraft on the ground rely almost entirely on communication. One misunderstood instruction, one missed taxiway, one aircraft entering the wrong runway in low visibility, near the rear galley. A flight attendant quietly steadies herself as the aircraft brakes unexpectedly for crossing traffic ahead. A fully loaded aircraft suddenly braking on wet pavement is not a small thing. Several passengers finally look up from their phones, only for a moment. Outside the window, another aircraft suddenly appears through the rain ahead. For a moment, both aircraft are moving toward the same intersection of taxiways. Then the other aircraft disappears back into the rain and darkness. Most passengers still feel like they're sitting inside a parked aircraft. But outside, aircraft continue moving through the rain with very little room for error. The rain grows heavier against the windows. Blue taxiway lights slide silently past in the darkness outside. Then the aircraft slows again. Ahead, bright runway lights begin appearing through the rain. For a moment, everything goes quiet again. Outside the window, runway lights stretch into the darkness ahead, like a glowing corridor. Then the clearance comes. Cleared for takeoff. The engines power up. The entire cabin begins to shake. Loose items rattle against tray tables, while the runway lights begin racing beneath the aircraft. Faster and faster. Passengers are pressed back into their seats. The acceleration keeps building. And then the aircraft reaches a speed most passengers never realize exists. A boundary. A point where stopping may no longer be the safest option. At this speed, The aircraft is committed. A sudden bang echoes through the cabin. Several passengers look up instantly. Outside the window, a brief flash appears near one engine, before disappearing behind the wing into the darkness. The aircraft shudders slightly. For a second, nobody inside the cabin really knows what just happened. Passengers have no way of knowing whether the sound came from a tire, the runway, or one of the engines. But the acceleration continues. After a certain speed, stopping is no longer always the safer option. No announcement comes from the cockpit. The aircraft just keeps accelerating, faster, louder. The overhead bins begin vibrating violently as the aircraft races down the runway. Heat rapidly builds inside the brakes, even before the wheels leave the ground. Now everything matters at once. Runway length, aircraft weight, weather, engine performance. Then suddenly, the vibration changes, the nose lifts, and the rumbling beneath the cabin floor disappears completely as the aircraft leaves the runway and climbs into the night sky. Inside the cabin, passengers begin relaxing almost immediately. Seat belts loosen slightly. A few people return to their phones. Outside the window, the city is already disappearing beneath the clouds. But near the front of the aircraft, the crew is still listening carefully. One flight attendant reaches for the interphone, while another briefly looks toward the cockpit door, waiting, monitoring. And strangely enough, at 30,000 feet, the aircraft is often safer than it was only minutes earlier. Hours later, the cabin lights dim as the aircraft begins descending through clouds and rain. Outside, rain pours down the windows, while below, the lights of the city slowly begin appearing through the darkness. Most passengers think the difficult part of the flight is over, but near the front of the aircraft, the crew is becoming more focused, not less. Beneath the cabin floor, the landing gear drops into place with a heavy mechanical impact. Several passengers instinctively look up at the sound. Outside, runway lights shimmer across wet pavement. The aircraft continues descending. Then, the movement changes. Small corrections ripple through the cabin as the aircraft fights unstable winds near the runway. One wing drops slightly before rising again. Engine power increases, then falls back. Then suddenly, the runway disappears behind heavy rain crossing the windshield. For a moment, nobody inside the cabin knows whether the landing will continue. The engines surge again. The aircraft drops lower and lower. Then suddenly, impact. Seat belts tighten instinctively across passengers. Several people grab the armrests as reverse thrust roars through the cabin. Water sprays outward behind the wing while the aircraft fights to slow down on the rain-soaked runway. Even after touchdown, the aircraft is still moving at enormous speed because touchdown is not the end of the flight. It is one of the most critical phases of the entire journey. The aircraft brakes hard before finally leaving the runway. Only then does the tension begin fading from the cockpit. Passengers immediately reach for phones and bags. The crew does not yet. They continue watching, listening, checking, because even now, anything can still happen as the aircraft taxis to the gate. For most passengers, the flight ends the moment the wheels touch the runway. For the crew, it doesn't. Not yet. Because even after landing, the aircraft is still moving through rain, ground traffic, and low visibility. The radios are still active. Ground crews are still moving around the aircraft. Sometimes, one missed call is enough, or one distracted moment. Most passengers never notice any of it, but after this flight, you probably will. Welcome to Cabin Confidential. Subscribe. Because the most important stories in aviation are the ones you probably have never heard before.